Star Trek: The Next Generation, Starfleet Academy, Number 3, Survival. Chapter 1. Calling it a city would have been strongly exaggerating. It was a settlement, and not much of one at that. No building was higher than 2 stories tall. Furthermore, much of the area lay in ruin. Most buildings had gaping holes or no roof or were simply rubble. There was hardly any movement because it was the hottest part of an already hot day, and the few inhabitants of the settlement were indoors. The air hung heavily in the subspace communications building, a building that had been badly damaged but nevertheless had been the first one restored to some semblance of order. There were no breezes to move through it and cool things down. The individual who was on monitor duty did not care about such things and wouldn't have admitted it even if he did. His skin was hard and many-faceted. His eyes, nose, and mouth were little more than slits. He wore the uniform of a Starfleet cadet and the expression of someone who was growing bored and convinced his current assignment was pointless. That did not stop him, however, from doing what he was supposed to do. He checked the chronometer and sighed. For the past 59 minutes, he had been monitoring any possible subspace transmissions. None had been incoming. Now, as scheduled, he was to place his hourly call for help. He tapped the comm pad and then spoke slowly and carefully. "Attention," he said. "This is Dantar 4, transmitting to any Federation or Klingon vessel. We are in distress. Repeat. We are in extreme distress. Please send representatives as soon as possible. This is a Code 1 emergency. Please respond or send representatives. Dantar out." He fed the message through the encoder, scrambling it so that only those for whom it was intended would be able to make sense of it. The message had been carefully worded, hashed out in detail by the current population of Dantar 4, which had dwindled literally overnight from several hundred, a mixture of Federation and Klingon colonists, to precisely 8. Dantar 4 had been victimized by a furious and utterly unprovoked assault. The assault had been repelled and the attacker destroyed, but at a terrible cost. The colony world had been so extensively ravaged that maintaining it was impossible. The evacuation shuttles, however, had been crammed to capacity, so 8 brave individuals had volunteered to stay behind, 5 Starfleet Academy cadets and 3 Klingon cadets. The person doing the transmitting, Zach Kebron, was one of the former. Zach was a member of the warrior species known as the Brickar, and at that particular moment he was reflecting on their situation. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, going on 3, they'd been sitting on Dantar, awaiting rescue, but none had been forthcoming. When the colonists had departed, they assured the cadets that barely a week would pass before help arrived. Not that those remaining behind were in life-threatening danger, not yet at any rate. Although the food storage facilities had been devastated past the point of supporting hundreds of colonists, there was more than enough to accommodate the 8 volunteers for several weeks to come. There was shelter, a couple of buildings with 4 walls and a roof left standing. That was sufficient, if not the height of luxury, but there was also the loneliness to deal with. The loneliness and the awareness that more attacks might be forthcoming. The uncertainty of what might happen and what might not. What if they were there more than several weeks and the food did, in fact, run out? What would they be reduced to doing in order to subsist? At what point was survival, simply for the sake of survival, no longer worth it? They were difficult questions to which Zach had no answers. All he had instead was time. He checked the chronometer again. The big problem was that they didn't even have any proof that the transmissions being sent were, in fact, going anywhere, at least anywhere of significance. A number of vital components in the subspace transmission console had been pulverized and were beyond repair. The cadets had rigged it up as best they could, but there was a very great likelihood that the signal they were sending was so weak that a receiver would practically have to be in orbit to pick it up. What else, though, could they do? Zach heard footsteps behind him. He almost didn't bother to turn around, but the habit of caution prompted him to do so. He kept a neutral expression on his face as he saw a tall, fierce-looking Klingon enter. His long mustache, with small metal caps at the ends, swayed slightly from the motion of his head. Kodash. The Klingon chucked a thumb. "I will take over," he said. Zach knew all too well that Kodash had taken an immediate dislike to him. Kodash had been one of the 3 Klingon emissaries who had been sent to the colony world at the same time as the Federation cadets. Since Dantar IV had been a co-venture of the Federation and Klingons, representatives from both concerned groups had shown up when arguments among the colonists had threatened to destroy the colony. The representatives had managed to smooth things over. Then the unknown attackers destroyed the colony. Now it was taking every bit of self-control that the cadets and Klingons possessed not to fall into the same trap of squabbling that had poisoned the atmosphere of the colony in the first place. However, Kodash had not been making it easy. He had made no effort to hide his disdain for Zach Kebron, just as the Brickar had traditionally taken great pride in their dislike for Klingons. Zach knew that Kodash had legitimate reason for showing up at that particular moment. It was Kodash's time to take over monitoring the subspace communications. A schedule had been worked up, times doled out. However, it was a combination of Zach's own frustration, of Kodash's manner, of the growing worry that they might never get off the barren rock called Dantar IV, and the utter lack of movement in the air. All of that together prompted Zach to respond, "It's all right." Kodash cocked his head with impatient curiosity. "What is all right?" "I can stay on duty for a while longer." Zach waved him off dismissively. "You go ahead and attend to other matters." Kodash strode forward. For a satisfying moment, Zach could almost see the veins starting to stand out on the sides of Kodash's head, and then slowly, deliberately, he said, "Move out of the way." Zach gave the single most effective reply he could. He turned in his chair, presenting his back to the Klingon. Kodash snapped, and a second later so did the chair. He knew better than to try and shove the Brickar out of the seat. Zach was too heavy and the leverage was all wrong, so he chose the next best thing. The chair was mounted on a single, rather heavy support strut. Kodash grabbed the back of the chair and yanked with all his strength. The chair snapped off and Zach was sent tumbling to the ground. Kodash had no time at all to gloat over this. Zach did not even fully stand up. He scrambled from his crouched position on the floor and charged forward, his legs moving like pistons. All the weeks of frustration and pent-up anger flooded out. There was far more to the outburst than just a dislike that the two had taken to each other. There was the overwhelming sense of helplessness over their situation and the unnerving prospect that it might continue indefinitely. Zach hurled himself at Kodash, leaping through the air, arms spread wide. Kodash barely rolled out of the way in time as Zach threw himself forward. The two stumbled out of the building into the town square. Zach drew back his fist. A firm hand clamped down on Zach's wrist, stopping him from delivering the punch. A strong voice said, in no uncertain terms, "No, Zach, do not do it." The angry Brickard did not even look back over his shoulder. "Let go, Worf," he said. "First you let go of Kodash," Worf replied. Now Zach did turn to look at his fellow cadet. "This is not your concern." The strong young Klingon did not release his grip on Zach's wrist. If anything, it grew more resolute. "Zach, this will accomplish nothing," he said. The other cadets were approaching the square now, as were the other Klingons. They'd heard the sound of fighting, the angry voices, the crashing, and the struggle. In the still air of Dantar IV, sounds had a habit of carrying rather far. Worf gave them a glance that spoke volumes. "Let me handle this," it said. Kodash now had enough of his breath back to say defiantly, "He provoked it." "I provoked nothing," replied Zach sharply. "I spoke with respect. You took offense at my politeness." "Lower your fist," said Worf, "and we will discuss this in a civil manner." When they had first met, Zach would have trusted Worf no more than he did any other Klingon. In time, though, through continued exposure to Worf, he had come to trust in his Klingon classmate. But he had discovered that this trust did not automatically extend to other Klingons. Indeed, he was finding it singularly difficult to tolerate them, much less trust them. Nevertheless, Zach lowered his fist. He was aware of several of his classmates watching him. Tanya Tobias, the young engineering wizard, watching through narrow, slitted eyes. Her blonde hair, once kept with meticulous care, was dried out and frizzy from the relentless heat. She looked far more haggard and tired than when she had first arrived. To her right was Mark McHenry, usually called by his nickname Mac. His specialty of astronavigation was of limited use when stranded for long periods of time on a deserted colony world. Mac was an airy soul with a tendency to zone out on various occasions. At those times it seemed as if he were not paying attention to what was going on around him. In fact, he was hyper-aware. So much so, in fact, that he only needed to give it a small portion of his concentration. The rest was devoted to just about anything that occurred to him. At this moment, even Mac was fully attuned to the stress of the moment. While Zach's notice was on the cadets, Worf was studying the Klingons, waiting to see what their reaction to the current crisis might be. One of the two remaining Klingons was named Gower. The shortest of the three, he was still exceptionally formidable. He held no love for humans or Brickar, and also possessed an obvious contempt for Worf. Worf was Klingon on the outside, but Starfleet on the inside. It was a mix that Gower considered to be completely inappropriate and a recipe for distrust. Fortunately, however, Gower was not in command. That fell to the young female Klingon who labored to keep her classmates in control. Her name was Kaler. She was stern, proud, unyielding. When she spoke, it was with a confidence in her abilities and a certainty that she was always positively, absolutely right. She had so much confidence, in fact, that the possibility that she could be wrong about anything seemed remote. In short, Kaler was everything that any Klingon female could possibly aspire to be. Worf's respect for her had metamorphosed over the weeks from grudging admiration to grudging awe. As torn as he perpetually felt between the Klingon heritage and human upbringing, he envied her peace of mind and certainty in all things. The time they'd spent on the planet, while having clear effects on the composure and physical well-being of practically everyone else there, had driven Kaler into a state of utter calm. To some degree, it worried Worf a little. It almost made him wonder if Kaler was due to crack at any time, bottling up whatever frustrations and fears she might have, and perhaps this latest altercation would be the thing that pushed her over the edge. "Kodash, what happened?" demanded Kaler. Kodash straightened his uniform and said in an angry voice, "It was time for my watch on the subspace monitor. The Brickar would not yield it to me." "Did you begin the fight, or did he?" "He began it." "I did no such thing," said Zach firmly. Kaler's gaze flickered to Worf. Worf folded his arms and said firmly, "If Zach Keeburn states that he did not begin the fight, then that is sufficient for me." "Are you calling me a liar?" thundered Kodash. Kaler turned her attention back to Kodash. "Did he physically assault you first?" "That is of no relevance." "It is of relevance to me, Kodash," Kaler said, voice like flint. "That should be sufficient for you. Now, did the Brickar strike you first? Answer me, yes or no." "No, but—" "Get out of here, Kodash." Kodash looked like he was about to erupt. "How dare you?" When Kaler spoke again, her voice was lower and softer. They had all learned at this point that the angrier Kaler got, the more softly she spoke. She got good and angry without getting loud and angry, and what she said softly and firmly was once again, "Get out of here, Kodash." Kodash opened his mouth to argue once more, but then closed it. The look in Kaler's eyes, the sound of her voice, finally penetrated. He took a step back, tossing a glare once more at Zach, and then stalked away. Worf promptly took Zack a few steps aside and said in no uncertain terms,
"You had no business provoking him in that manner."
"What's your problem, Worf?" demanded Zack. "Even Kaler took my side."
"I am not Kaler," Worf reminded him. "And what I say is that you knew perfectly well that your actions would prompt the reaction that Kodash had. Do not cause such situations in the future. Is that understood?"
Worf and Zack had been through a great deal together. First enemies, then roommates and classmates, and finally allies. But now even the strength of that long-standing relationship was being sorely tested. Zack seemed to consider for a long moment how to respond, and finally he settled on a simple yes.
"Good," said Worf. "I very much anticipate not having to have this discussion in the future. Now, if you wish continued duty in the monitor room, then do not let me stop you."
Zack nodded briefly, headed back into the monitoring building. Worf glanced around at the others and said,
"I would think that you all have more important things to occupy your time than to witness this display. Am I correct?"
There were brief nods from the other cadets, and then they headed back to what they had been doing. Only at that point did Worf let out a slow breath. Of everyone who had entered the square to witness the blow-up between Zack and Kodash, only Worf and Kalar remained. They stood there in silence for a moment, silence that Kalar eventually broke. "Well," she said briskly, "that could have been a lot worse."
"Indeed," agreed Worf. "We were fortunate."
She let out a low sigh, and for the first time in weeks, Worf detected the slightest hint of uncertainty. "Worf," she said slowly, "what in the name of Kalis is going to happen to us?"
"We will be rescued,"
he said firmly. "You believe that?" She took a step closer to him. Now he saw the sadness in her eyes. Clearly, the confidence she exuded was not necessarily a true indicator of her genuine state of mind.
"Of course I believe it," said Worf. "Why would I believe otherwise?"
She rubbed the bridge of her nose between her thumb and forefinger. "Because we have not heard from anyone since the colonists departed in their ships. Because it is taking everything we have not to be at each other's throats. Worf, you might be deluding yourself."
"I refuse to consider that."
She shrugged her shoulders. "If you refuse to believe that the sun is hot, does that make the sun any less hot? No, I think not. The universe does not hang on your approval of its nature. It simply is what it is. Believe anything other than that if you care to, but you would be deluding yourself, and self-delusion is a luxury that a leader cannot afford." She turned from him and started to walk away. Then she turned around. "At least your science expert, Salida, did not come running out here to watch that senseless altercation. It is comforting to know that at least the Vulcan has better things to do with her time." Worf simply nodded. No reason to mention to Kalar that Salida had not shown up because she wasn't in the town. Salida had been the least affected by the arid nature of Dantar. And there were two reasons for this. First, her homeworld of Vulcan was fairly arid to begin with. Her body had a variety of built-in mechanisms that enabled her to deal with the scorching environment of Dantar. Second, the renowned Vulcan stoicism would not have permitted her to admit that she was having difficulties, even if she were. At this moment, she was out in the desert, exploring the environment, taking readings, conducting experiments. In short, she was overdue, was what she was. Chapter 2. The sun of Dantar beat down on Salida, but she didn't even notice it. Her full attention was on her tricorder, which was responding with a rather puzzling blip reading. She checked it once more and confirmed that it was indeed in working order, and what it was telling her was totally unexpected. Her original plan involved monitoring soil samples for possible future farming use, but matters had taken a decidedly different turn because her tricorder was unmistakably picking up some sort of signal. "A beacon," she murmured to herself. "A homing beacon of some sort." Yes, that was definitely it. She tapped her communicator. "Salida to Worf," she said. Nothing. Her eyebrows knit together a moment, and she tried again. Again, there was no response. Had the heat affected it? That seemed unlikely. Perhaps the communication was being jammed. Now there was an intriguing thought. Some sort of automatic homing beacon that was also serving to scramble communications by anyone who might discover it. Or at least, and here was the part that was worrisome, or Salida prone to worry, scrambling communications on frequencies used in Starfleet communicators. Fascinating, she murmured. Salida had two options at this point. She could return to the settlement, alert the others, and bring them back, which was the prudent and cautious thing to do, or she could stay around and investigate. Salida knew that going to alert the others might be the wrong move, since she had no idea what was sending the beacon. It might be coming from some installation that was permanent. On the other hand, it might be a passing vessel, someone who had landed for whatever reason and might be taking off shortly. It could be someone friendly, and they would be rescued. Of course, on the other hand, it could be someone hostile, who might endeavor to kill Salida the moment she showed up. So many possibilities suggested themselves, but the one that preyed most on Salida's mind was that if she left now, she might never have the opportunity to find out. A mischance. It was a notion that her curiosity might not be satisfied that was uppermost in her mind, superseding her own safety. Of what consequence was that when one got down to it? She was stuck on a planet with lightly seasoned cadets, cranky Klingons, and dwindling chances of rescue. She was already in danger. It was like being out in the rain. Once you were wet, all you could get was more wet, which somehow wasn't as bad. Salida proceeded carefully, using as shelter the few rocks and small outcroppings that dotted the otherwise flat landscape. She made her way over a very small mountain and froze where she was. It was a ship, all right, gleaming white-green metal in the sunlight. It lay on the ground in ruins, incapable of lifting off again. Stabilizers and thrusters littered the landscape. Airfoils had been torn away, and there was a fairly long skid mark along the ground, almost half a mile long, as near as Salida could tell. The ship had come in at an angle, sliding along the ground out of control, badly chewed up as it went. Salida recognized it immediately. If the markings and general shape, at least what was left of the shape, were not sufficient for identification, certainly the huge burn marks on the hull were distinctive. They were the kinds of scars that a ship sustained when it was hit by phaser fire, in particular the phaser cannon that was positioned on the surface of Dantar 4. There was no question whatsoever in Salida's mind that she had come upon the downed ship that had attacked the colony. Tricorder readings during the attack identified a ship of Klingon design, but packing Federation weaponry. This bizarre combination caused much fury and many accusations between the two groups of colonists, as both sides had pointed fingers and accused the other of sabotage. The unresolved question of the ship's origin plagued the cadets who had been left behind. That question could wait. She moved forward. She was not unprepared for trouble. For that reason, a phaser was securely attached to her belt. She checked quickly to make sure that it was fully powered up. It was. She hoped she would not need it. Salida approached the ship carefully, studying the tricorder for any sign of life. There was no movement. There was no one on board, no one alive at any rate. But the homing beacon was still going. The question was, had it been set by someone once it had landed, which would imply that someone had survived, or had it gone on automatically upon impact? It could have also been activated by someone who then died shortly thereafter. So many possibilities. She slid through one of the gaping holes, her booted feet landing noiselessly on the deck of the ship. Light cascaded through the various rips and holes in the ship's hull, which was fortunate. Although she was armed, it had not occurred to her in the blazing light of Dantar to carry a flashlight. As she made her way cautiously further into the ship, though, the light decreased and the darkness surrounded her. The metal grating creaked under her weight, and every noise was magnified, sounding like thunder in the silence. She bumped into a body. Salida jumped back, startled. She squinted her eyes, adjusting to the lesser light. No, it was not a body. She aimed her tricorder at it and came up utterly empty. Then she saw the open locker to the right and understood. It was some sort of work suit, possibly for effecting repairs on the ship while in space. It was empty and had fallen out of the locker when the ship had crashed. Always good for a jump scare. She managed mild annoyance at having been caught off guard. She glanced at the tricorder, and there it glared at her, a warning of perhaps half a second, a life reading, directly in front of her. Whatever it was, it had managed to approach her in total silence. No mean feat, considering the sharpness of her Vulcan hearing. Reflexively, Selita took a step back, and that was quite likely the only thing that saved her life. She felt a swift movement of air directly in front of her, a swinging fist. If there had been any doubt on Selita's part that she was dealing with a hostile entity, that notion had quickly been laid to rest. Selita took 2 more steps backward, and her attacker came after her. She dodged to the left, a furious blow missing her, and yanked out her phaser. But as she brought it up, an arm swung back, backhanding the weapon out of her grasp. It clattered away somewhere into the dimness of the ship. She glanced in the direction that the phaser had gone, and that proved a mistake. While she was momentarily distracted, a fist lashed out. It connected with the side of her head. Stars exploded behind Selita's eyes. She staggered, using all her strength just to stay conscious. Her back slammed against the wall of the ship. This was a blessing because it gave her something to brace herself against. She reached into herself, finding the calm center, reaching into her training and discipline. There would be no panic. There would be no rash moves. There would be no mental scolding over how she should have had people backing her up. She was here. She was in trouble. She would handle it. That was all. Before her attacker could move again, Selita brought her right hand down and right knee up. She trapped his arm in between, momentarily immobilizing it. For one dangerous instant, she was off balance and vulnerable. It was a necessary gamble. As her left arm stabbed out for the support she needed, she found it, her attacker's shoulder. The skin she felt under her fingers was leathery, almost rock hard. It was very familiar, but she saved identification for later. Now survival was all that mattered. She squeezed hard, pressing thumb and fingers down in the manner she had been taught. There was a startled gasp from the darkness. Her opponent staggered. That was all, just staggered. The Vulcan nerve pinch should have rendered him instantly unconscious. Selita pushed down harder with all her strength. Her enemy stumbled and cracked his head against the wall that had been Selita's salvation moments before. Selita's weight was now on him, her limbs tangled in his. He pitched forward with a dull roar, and Selita went down as well, unable to extricate herself in time. They crashed to the floor with an impact that Selita might have sworn, were she a fanciful individual, was sufficient to shake the entire planet. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Selita's breath was coming in ragged gasps, but her attention was fully focused on her attacker. He made no sound, didn't so much as stir. He was out cold. Selita pulled herself out from under him and simply sat there for a moment, steadying her breathing. She allowed herself a small glimmer of satisfaction, but that was all. Even that was something of a luxury for a Vulcan, but she had earned it. She rose, dusting herself off, wiping the grime and grit from her uniform. She smoothed it out as best she could and then studied the situation before her. What to do with him? Space in the ship was cramped, so she simply reached around in the darkness until she found one of his legs, and she dragged him out the same hole she'd entered through. Her eyes adjusted very quickly to the light. Light to dark took her a while, but dark back to light was no trouble thanks to the structure of the Vulcan eye that provided extra protection against brightness. She looked down at who she'd been fighting. It was exactly what she had thought. There was no question in her mind that someone was going to be very upset when she got back to the settlement.